Before I get into the main point of this video, I just want to say a quick word about the horrendous situation in the Ghouta district of eastern Damascus. It really does seem to be hell on earth. 98 civilians have died today, many of them children. And I think it's fair to say this is near equivalent to Leningrad of the 21st century. I can't imagine what the conditions are like over there, and it's on my mind. But what I want to talk about in this video is the subject of male feminists, i.e., men who self identify as feminists. Now, there's a few disclaimers I want to make so that I'm not misunderstood with my intentions on this. Firstly, in no way am I telling anyone how they should identify themselves, how they should um, choose to identify with a movement or an ideology. That's not what I want to do. Nor am I coming at this from a sort of smug, snide, or sort of abrasive, ultra macho position, like, oh, male feminists. Uh, the purpose of this is not to ridicule anyone, um, but to ask some honest questions or raise some honest issues about some of the issues that I have around some of these guys. And the third disclaimer is I'm not talking about everyone. There's guys I've known in my life who would self identify this way, like they would identify with this movement closely. And I've found them decent, likable people. It's not, I don't hate them or something like that. Nevertheless, I do think there are some noticeable trends among Western feminist men. Now, I say Western because there's parts of the world, and I make the same argument with feminism in general. There's parts of the world where a specific women's rights movement is definitely required. Now, women's rights is important all over the world, but there are parts of the world where there are issues that are severely impacting women. I would argue much more than Western countries. And in some of those situations, you get men who do take significant personal risk to go out of their way to be advocates for women's rights. Those men deserve enormous respect, and I give them enormous respect. I'll give some examples. There was a doctor I came across in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he spent hours and hours and hours and days and days and days working with victims of gang rape in the DRC and in that particular region of Africa. Women are used as kind of war trophies, and it is a chronic problem. And he spent days, weeks, months, and years of his life dedicated to helping these women get through the psychological struggle of that horrendous experience. So that's one example. Another one is a while back I came across some men in Iran who had actually worn niqabs, and they were making this demonstration to show solidarity. It may have been Afghanistan. Don't quote me on that. It may have actually been Afghanistan. Can't quite remember. It was a few years ago. But basically, it was a conservative Islamic country, and these guys were trying to make people feel some empathy, make other men think about what it would be like to be a woman. So there are men in parts of the world who go out of their way to stand up for women's rights. Those men deserve respect. And I would like to think I would join them if I was in those circumstances. Also, it goes without saying, I believe in women's rights. I believe in human rights, and I believe in the principles of egalitarianism. I believe that third wave feminism has greatly detracted from that. But this video isn't about all the ins and outs of my issues with feminism. because that would, it's too broad a subject to cover specifically in one video, and I've covered it before. So I want to talk specifically about men who call themselves feminists. One thing I notice is they tend to, in my opinion, not really think for themselves. I honestly have noticed that there is this tendency for male feminists to simply agree with what the female counterparts are saying or what they seem to think they want to hear. Now, I wouldn't make it as black and white as, oh, they're just doing it because they want to get laid by these women, and feminists might say, oh, they're not true feminists anyway. I don't think it's that simple, but so I think a certain degree of conviction is there, but I also think there is a subservience to that. Why do I say that? Well, feminism, whatever way you gloss it over, is a gynocentrist movement. Feminism, it's women focused, right? And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that when it's focusing on issues that do specifically impact women. That's why I'm not against feminism, period. But the reason I don't call myself a feminist is because I believe in the Western context, it's become far too divisive and dishonest. And yeah, I do think there's a deeply misandrous undertone with it, or underbelly, let's say, within the movement. Now, I have yet to see a man describing himself as a feminist calling out some of those hypocrisies. He will say, oh, but feminism is good for men because it frees us from the shackles of patriarchy. Well, I I am the first to admit that there is issues within, let's say, certain macho culture that is not good for men. When men are put under enormous pressure from other men to, with to go about things in a certain way. I mean, we've all been there at some point where you've been in a group of guys who are drinking heavily and they're all trying to prove something, and it's just this macho, pretentious, braggadocious sort of situation, and I've no time for that. But to me, that doesn't mean going to the other extreme and say, oh, let's reject toxic masculinity. I believe in such a thing as positive masculinity. And this is where I disagree with the approach that certain male feminists take. They reject their masculinity altogether. Now, it's their right, but then they start imposing it on other guys and saying that, and this is probably getting into wider social issues, but they certainly endorse this mentality that because traditionally there were rigid gender roles, which definitely had a certain detrimental effect. For example, young boys were kind of forced to be tough all the time, and so on. That wasn't a good thing, but I would argue that the whole identity politics thing is now taken it to the other extreme, whereby if you are a man that connects with his masculinity, that feels masculine, and is comfortable with that, then you're going to be told that one of two things: either, oh, it's you're pandering to society, social constructs, or you'll be told that you're part of the problem, that you're promoting toxic masculinity, and to me, it's just it's this patronizing idea that masculine men aren't think that they aren't. That's not actually the way they feel comfortable with. Maybe it is, you know. Um, Now, I'm not saying that feminist men are all feminine orientated. That wouldn't be fair or accurate. But I mentioned the subservient thing. The reason I say that is because I can honestly say I haven't seen a feminist man challenge a feminist woman on any issue at all. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they have. But I'd make the criticism of them that I make with feminists in general, which is they are silent on the double standards. They say things like, when the extremists are pointed out, they say, "Oh, but they're a fringe group. They're not," But they do minimize it, and they do fail to recognize that when a movement is constantly shaming half the human race every single day. I mean, Jordan Peterson summed this up much better than I have. What radical feminism is doing is polarizing young men. It's telling them that they're inherent beasts, that they're inherent rapists. And what I see from male feminists is placating that mentality, is placating the outright bigotry that female feminists often show towards men in general. So far from empowering men to stand up against the patriarchy, what they are doing is is pandering to divisive attitudes that turn women against men. And it can be very, very frustrating sometimes. I saw an example of this. The filmmaker Casey J, who I have enormous respect for because I think she's taken a lot of personal risk in terms of, she knew she would get backlash when she made that documentary film, The Red Pill, which was covering the whole idea that men's issues need to be spoken about a lot more. She appeared on an Australian news program. The male presenter there automatically got into defensive sort of mode and pandered to the feminist attacks against her. And he was like, "Oh, but why are you going against feminism?" And that was the whole narrative that he was spinning. And why are you interviewing these men? Uh, why can't men and women work together? That's all very well, but male feminists spend a lot more time, in my opinion, pandering to the sort of divisive mentality that female feminists promote, rather than actually saying, well, there are issues that impact men, and I'm a male feminist, and I'm going to speak up for those issues. If you were really interested in men's issues, you would be an egalitarian, in my opinion. But by calling yourself a feminist, you're endorsing a gynocentrist movement that is female focused. Now, there's nothing wrong with a man standing up for women's rights. Nothing at all. I believe in women's rights, and I will speak up in areas where I think that women are treated badly. But I don't call myself a feminist for the reasons that I think third wave Western feminism is a hugely divisive and hugely dishonest movement. I can't stand it. To be quite blunt about it, I can't stand it. And far from being the underdog, it has enormous influence in the media and in politics. So whenever men's issues are raised, they get drowned out. Feminists say that feminism is good for men. Yet, whenever men's issues are raised, they're the very ones who will say, "Oh, what are you men complaining about? You have all the power." Now, individual feminists may not think that way, but that is what the movement does. So, my message, or my not message, my question for male feminists is, how can you? What's your answer to this? If you say you just believe in equality, and feminism is just about equality, can you honestly tell me that you will therefore address issues that disproportionately impact men, and you will insist that those issues are heard? And will you condemn the misandry, the anti male attitudes within the feminist movement? I mean, to me, it's like white liberals who openly and uncompromisingly support Black Lives Matter without thinking of some of the divisive rhetoric that they come out with. Or there's many other examples. Now, I'm not going to go down the line and say, "Oh, these guys are self-hating men." I think that's a bit dramatic and a bit unfair. But I would suggest that they give the impression that they're not really thinking for themselves. I think they're driven by guilt. I really do. I think they're driven by guilt of being a man. Now, I may have said this before, but if I haven't, here I go. I am a white, straight, Western guy. I feel guilty for none of those things because I have no choice over them. I'm not proud of them, but I don't feel guilty about them either. And in my opinion, a lot of male feminists are driven basically by guilt and this sense of shame for the. I mean, I've seen it. If you think that's hyperbole, I've seen this sort of attitude in comments from male feminists. Yesterday, I came across an utterly. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The guy was saying, "Oh, women MPs are constantly pushed to the side." What utter nonsense! I mean, the most powerful politician in the country is a woman. So it was about the issue. It was being reported on the BBC about a third of women MPs have felt bullied or harassed or bullied in their workplace. Well, there may be a problem with harassment. That's been well documented. Um, Bullying, well, no one wants to work in an unpleasant environment. But I watch Prime Minister's Question Time. I watch political exchanges. I watch committees on the BBC Parliament channel. And there are plenty of women MPs who give as good as they get and very often initiate the insults. Why is it okay for Emily Thornberry to call her opponents cavemen, but if a man dares to, you know, challenge her, then he's accused of patronising? So women MPs can't have it both ways. They can't demand to be treated equally, and then when they are treated equally, i.e., by men who challenge them, then they claim, oh, it's because I'm a woman. Spare me. I've no time for that. Anyway, the point is, I came across, like I say, this male feminist. He was like, "Oh, women MPs are pushed to the side, and we need to give them more of a voice, as if they don't already have a voice." Give me a break. But that's the sort of disingenuous nonsense that is out there. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Just a few concluding thoughts. I'm not telling anyone what to do. I'm really not. That's not my prerogative. It's not. I wouldn't waste my time on it. Nor am I saying that all male feminists are pushover beta males. You know, I try to avoid those sort of insults. I think it's isn't really helpful to discussions. But I do think there is a subservient aspect there. I would like to see male feminists challenge some of the problems within their movement, even if they want to still call themselves feminists. The way for any movement to move forward is by recognizing the problems within. But it's a bit like being in a political party. You nail your colors to the mast, and then you won't, you'll be loyal no matter what. So male feminists are incapable of recognizing the flaws within their movement, in my opinion, and that's unfortunate. And that seems to be a fundamental problem. And the final point is I don't hate male feminists. I'm not against them, and I'm sure there are areas I would agree with them on a range of issues. But I do think that they're too silent on the problems within the movement, and I do honestly think a lot of them are driven by guilt. Now they might get very defensive and say, "Oh, that's not true," but I'm going on that subservient aspect because that's a sign of guilt. That's an indication of that sort of sentiment. I mean, it's only my speculation. I can't prove it. It's speculation, but I think speculation with some weight behind it. Okay, thanks for watching.